In 1939, war was raging in Europe. A few Unitarians went over to see if they could help. They brought some money, they brought some wit. They were coming up with documents, alternative documents, fake documents, anything that would let people lose the document that indicated that they were in a hated group and be at danger. And it worked, to a surprising degree worked. And even while the Nazis were occupying Prague, there were Unitarians in Prague pumping out documents. And then Paris, while the Nazis were in Paris, and what became the Unitarian Service Committee, finally in Lisbon. And they realized the documents were helping, but it would be better if they looked more official. And so they asked one of the refugees, Hans Deutsch from Austria, who was an artist, to come up with some kind of a seal or logo or something to put on there and make it look more of a document. And he came up with a symbol with a chalice and a flame, possibly inspired by the lit oil that would burn in ancient Greek and Roman temples, and the lights in the windows during trouble, letting people know this is a safe house. We don't have a lot of detailed history on the inspiration of it, but it became the symbol for the Unitarian Service Committee and all its good works around the world in times of trouble. And then when the Unitarians and Universalists merged, it ended up being the logo for the denomination. And we honor it in ritual in our meetings, and even committee meetings and things will light the chalice. Perhaps not thinking that it's also very visually similar to the Grail, one of the great religious symbols of the Western civilization, and then in other parts of the world, a feminine symbol. This is essentially a womb goddess symbol that has been grafted into Christianity and then taken up by liberal religion and used in various ways. So I want to go back into the history of what is represented in this visual form, remembering that personally, when we're exploring personal growth and trying to deal with transitions, we need to go to the left brain. We need to tap into the part of ourselves that isn't verbal, that is beyond intellect, that is deeper than rational. The imaginative, the creative, tends to be very visually oriented. So it is worth our time to ponder symbols to take us to places that we wouldn't have access to within. The earliest contributor to this would be sacred springs, and they are all over the world. Certainly in certain places in Greece, but one of the images I came up with was a Tongva sacred spring on the west side of LA, a beautiful tree and little pond there. And people would go for ritual cleansing and for inspiration. And we see that this is a connection to nature. That first of all, we're in nature religion. We're worshiping the water, the trees, the land that we live on. And that would be within our own personal being, the encounter with our own physicality. After all, we are animals. We are intellect living inside of animal flesh, and we live in that tension. There's a challenge. Sometimes we plan things that the body can't keep up with. Sometimes the body wants things that we aren't planning on, and we need to deal with that. This is our encounter with nature on a very personal level. And we go on walks and we do things to meditate on and be reverent toward our physical reality, our animal nature. The next stage would be wells. Wells involve water that is coming from an underground stream, is a natural expression of the world of nature, and then human effort is involved to build a containing basin or a tunnel to go down if it's further from the surface. And we have in various spiritual traditions the woman at the well. That is a guardian, someone tending the threshold where we are encountering the mystery. And then we're still in nature religion here. This is the inspiration that comes from the life force. We need water, we need air, we need the natural setting around us to be healthy if we are to be healthy. So worship at a well has a long tradition. One that is specifically tied to the Grail is at Glastonbury. It's called the Chalice Well. I've had a sip from it. And they say, well, because the chalice is buried nearby, if you drink from this well, you've had a drink from the Holy Grail. I feel more or less the same, so I Can't report any extraordinary epiphanies or anything, but it is a beautiful thing, and it has the mandorla pattern on the lid. That is the two circles that cross. And that crossing place is where the mystery meets everyday life. That is the place we go in worship. That is the place we go in meditation and reflection. And one story I would bring to you is from the great goddess Ceridwen. This is it's a birth story, and it involves a cauldron. And the cauldron tradition, which was a kind of sacred ceremony, rather shamanistic in its day. These stories come from the Mabinogion, which is a cycle of initiatory tales that precede the Arthurian tales. Influence are basically the text, the source of these stories that we know by different names. So the cauldron of the crone Ceridwen, the goddess of transformation, has a good story. She was a parent, she had a lovely daughter and an ugly son. Beyond ugly, he was disfigured, he was hideous, he scared people. He wasn't very bright either. Okay, this breaks a parent's heart. He adored both of her children. The daughter maybe a little more, we're not sure, because she goes to a lot of trouble for that son. She is, after all, a magical seer. She knows the past, present, and future. She has the sight, and she has the formula. That is, she can brew something up in her magical cauldron that will give one person the sight. She has this, can only be done once. It's a very arduous process. It takes a year and a day of constant stirring, and then she will have 3 drops of this essential magical medicine that will save her son. She can't make him good looking, but she can give him the knowledge of all that was past, present, and future. She can give him the sight. And so it begins. Well, she has other things to do. She's a goddess. So she hires a local boy, little Gwion. Gwion turns out to be an ideal employee. I know good help is hard to find, but she lucks out. She gets a diligent fellow with a strong back, and he stirs. He's got this big wood spoon, and he stirs it all day, and by night he kind of crowds up close to it to get a little warmth to sleep. But he does what he is hired to do, and the year proceeds properly, and on the very last day, this is a year and a day, and on that day, he is stirring, and by then this thing is broiling and hissing, and I mean, it's been cooking for a long time. Who knows what's in there? Eye of newt and all kinds of creepy crawlies. But that's not in the story, I made that up. Anyway, on the very last day, just before her son is about to get his medicine that will give him the sight, the splattering of the concoction causes 3 drops to splash onto Gwion's hand. Unbelievably hot. What would you do if something hot hit your hand? To ease the pain, and the employee unintentionally absorbs, ingests the magic. He, Shazam, has the grasp of all that has happened, past, present, and future. He has the sight. And one thing he knows right now is that goddess is pissed off at him. She is not going to take this well. And then with his outer eye, he looks, and there she is running toward him with rage in her face. He takes off. He realizes he's going to need to run very, very fast, faster than he can run. So in his mind, he sees himself as a hare, becomes a hare, and he takes off. Well, she sees that, and in her mind, she becomes a greyhound, which can run faster than a hare, and she takes off. He has this in mind, and so he thinks in his mind that he's a salmon, dives into the water, becomes a salmon, can swim very fast. She sees that. In her mind, she becomes an otter, and then she is an otter, and she's in the water, and she's got the claws on the salmon and just about to kill Gwion in his fishy form. When he imagines, first of all, he imagines he needs to get out of here. Then he imagines himself a crow and lifts up out of the water, is flying away, free as a bird. And she imagines that she is a hawk and is after the crow, and those talons are going down onto that poor crow, and at the very last second, Gwion has the sight and turns himself into a single grain of wheat. He falls from the sky, just happens to be a threshing floor down there. Lots, millions of grains of wheat falls among the others to hide forever, to be away from his death. And she imagines herself a black hen, and drops down into the grain and starts pecking away, and pecks with unbelievable patience until she finds the correct grain of wheat, which she swallows. End of it. Or is it? Notice that we have a rebirth death, a kind of a death as birth process. He's sort of going back. So now he's pregnancy, and she waits out the 9 months and gives birth to a beautiful baby. And she has a dagger ready because she's going to kill that baby. That baby has stolen her son's birthright. And she is about to do that. And she looks into that baby's face. You ever had the experience of looking into a newborn baby's face? And that face is beautiful. That face is beyond beautiful. It's got all the beauty of a baby and then some extra because it's a magical story. And he has this shining face, particularly his forehead, seems to sparkle. She can't do it. She can't kill him. She binds him up, makes a little boat, puts him out to sea. Maybe he'll drown. He doesn't drown. He floats around for hundreds of years, ends up being adopted by a court, turns into a magician. He has this incredible seer and changes his name to Merlin. This is customarily called the birth of Taliesin, which is his original name, once he is born, which means shining brow. It's just from his appearance. So there we have a story of transformation and survival, and it's one of the early cauldron magic stories. Then the cauldron proceeds and evolves some more into a bowl, a green bowl, a very beautiful green bowl that was said to have been carved by artisans out of a single enormous emerald that was found. And then maybe it's speculation, or maybe somebody knew how it got here. It fell from heaven. It was at one time the keystone in the crown of the most important character in heaven other than God, other than the life force. That was Lucifer, who was the person in charge of all the angels, the top dog angel in heaven, till he had a quarrel with the boss. You know how it happens. I mean, not all bosses, but I mean, it happens, okay? And before he descended, this gem fell. So the gem was never tainted by the descent. So we hear. I'm not sure who told me that. Maybe, was it Satan? Anyway, I digress. Not everybody watches Saturday Night Live, but some people like church chat. So we found this huge emerald. Somebody found this huge emerald and made a bowl out of it, a ceremonial bowl. And for the longest time, the Grail legends are associated with this. One thing we have is a bridging of light and dark there, because Lucifer is involved, like the church lady says, Satan is in the story somewhere. That is to say, not making a binary, not making dichotomous judgments about it. Oh, this is good, that is bad. But assuming that it's all in the mix somehow, and all in us somehow. And part of our challenge in our attempts to have enlightenment will be to deal with the dark sources, the shadow aspects of the inner life. So the bowl is said to have to come. If, say, we were having a gathering of the round table and everyone was seated in a circle so there is no head place at the table, everyone is equal, and then the Grail maiden walks in the room. The Grail maiden walks in. Sometimes she has a tray. The Grail doesn't actually sit on the tray, it floats just above it. Sometimes she's holding it, but her hands don't seem to actually touch it. Sometimes it's just going through the air. And it comes around to everyone, and everyone gets a sip. And what you experience gratifies your thirst, your hunger, your longing, your deepest aspirations, your spiritual needs, everything, to a degree that you have never experienced. Shazam! You have this experience. You will remember it forever. It only needs to happen once. An encounter with the mystery of that intensity is something you do not forget. And then it seems to float out of the room, or the Grail maiden follows it or something. So what do we have here? A vessel that represents spiritual power. I mean, it's associated with Christianity, so some of the images have crosses on them. The Grail maiden might have a bird behind her representing the angelic. We have all this transcendence in this image. It was woven into Christianity and is said to be the chalice that was at the Last Supper. They probably couldn't afford a fancy cup. It's probably some simple piece of earthenware, but it gets embroidered as it goes along. And then they say that Joseph of Arimathea, a sort of rich follower of Jesus, took it to the cross. It caught some of the blood, and that shows up in Wagner. And Okay, well, these stories are not mentioned in the scripture. These are all apocryphal add-ons. This is the embroidery that comes along with time. And what has happened is a goddess image, a womb image, has been folded into a more or less patriarchal tradition. All right, that's the syncretic process in religious tradition. It's not particularly a crime. It's everybody, even us. I mean, this is common, okay? And that is to say, anything that is holy, anything that invokes wonder is useful. Let's find a place for it in our story. Okay, well, there was a supper. Must have been a cup. How about we have that be, how about we work the old cauldron image, the old Grail bowl image in somehow, and imagine they had their wine from that. Or was it blood? Or was the blood later? And do the stories make sense? They don't need to make sense. And then you want something to really not make sense. This Joseph of Arimathea was apparently a traveler. Well, he was rich. He could have been in trade, and people involved in import export do go places, because somehow, for some reason, he carried this vital object all the way to Britain at the far edge of the Roman Empire. Yeah, there were ships that went there. Ships were pretty small in those days, but they had tin, and tin was crucial in making bronze. And so there were certain things that needed to come from Britain, and tradesmen would go there. For some reason, he went there, and took the Grail with him, and the spear. That was the spear that at the crucifixion caused the wound. It said the spear would go on bleeding forever in memory of that moment. And the spear he took and put in the ground in Britain, and it became a tree, and the tree is still there. This is Glastonbury, and the legends of Glastonbury in Somerset. And the Grail was buried in this little hill called the Tor, and that well I was mentioning earlier is at the foot of that. That's why they say you've had a drink of the Grail if you sip from that well. I had a friend at Stanford who got funding to go over and do some kind of magnetic resonance of the Tor to find the Holy Grail. They didn't find anything. I'm thinking, who funded this? Anyway, it was a fascinating project, and it's typical. That is the idea of, just recently, about 2 years ago, somebody in Spain decided that the Grail in the cathedral that happened to be in the town where they taught it at the local university, that was the Grail, and they built a case and sold a lot of books. That's objectification. That is the desire to be able to touch the mystery. And a deep longing for that, and this is why there are relics in every cathedral in Europe. And now, a relic is an interesting thing. If you take it symbolically, you say, oh, we're going to honor this saint, and maybe this saint represents generosity. Good thing. Let's meditate or even pray about this. If you take it lightly, it's a good thing. If you take it seriously, you're sort of trying to move a controlled impulse into the realm of the sacred, trying to make the divine something we can touch. Well, it's another dimension. Liberal religion in its tradition is trying to hold the tension between these two. Hold the findings of science, hold the wisdom traditions, and be enriched by both of them, and not try to reconcile them, and not try to make the mystery touchable, and not try to make the touchable mysterious. And it's a lively creative process, but our control needs are great. So that there's a lot of that around, and there are a lot of Dan Brown novels where the Grail is. And I went to Rosslyn, to the chapel, and went to where it's supposed to be, not because I think it's there, but because I like a good story. And the search for the Holy Grail is a terrific story. And it's a story we're all involved in. Not the Grail specifically, but the meaning of life, or a sense of fulfillment, or a sense of purpose, or a sense of belonging. We're searching for something hard to define, hard to depict, hard to touch. And do we find it? Yes, in bits and pieces. Yes, in our efforts. Yes, in our relationships. We find these things we long for, but you can't bolt it down. The next day you need to search a little more. It's never finished. It's never final. It's worthy of us. It's a good thing. To live in our longing is a good thing. It's a deepening thing. And the alternative is to be dull, is to not feel much, is to, in psychological language, to dissociate. That is, if things are uncomfortable, you can kind of click out. You can just go numb. It's not hard, but it's not very rich. The good things are more emotionally complicated and more dynamic and not finished. So the longing for meaning, for inspiration, that's something to live in a kind of tension again, creative tension. And that our spiritual sustenance will come in mysterious ways. Remember in Indiana Jones, they were searching for the Holy Grail and found it. And there were all these, if you haven't seen the movie, I am kind of spoiling it, but you probably saw the movie. They finally get the cave where the Grail is, and they meet the old knight who's been protecting it for hundreds of years, and there it is, right in front of you, the Holy Grail. The trouble is, there must be 100 Grails there. There are all these different Grails. And the bad guy gets in there and picks the fanciest Grail and kills him. There's some discernment involved here. And by the way, Indiana Jones' father, played by Sean Connery, is injured, so he's in peril. The Grail, if we can find the right Grail and put a little water in it, it will have incredible healing power. Anything put in it will, okay, we need the Grail. We're not just on a search. It's not just a thing of value. Which one does he pick? The simplest one, a humble cup. Not the one with all the jewels on it, not the one made of gold or silver, something like that. So apparently emptying ourselves to make space for something. Here is the meaning of a container. What is the container? The container is maybe our commitment to something, a calling of some kind to make the world a better place, to make art. Maybe it's a relationship, to be true to our beloved, to be true to our family, to be true to our friends. Maybe it's a community. What contains our aspirations, our imagination, our longing. So the symbols of our ideals are valuable. Joseph Campbell said to reach the mystery, you need to read the picture language, ponder the visuals. There will be words there will be story, and there might be some orthodoxy. Orthodoxy is the principles, beliefs. When I grew up, we said, a chant of some kind. I knew it at the time. I suppose if I stumbled into an evangelical church, I could follow it. But it was all this long list of things that we affirm, all these things that we believe, and we all agree that we all believe these things. Well, finally, the day came when I kind of picked through it, and I said, well, the first one's not too bad. That third one's a clunker. And you stop and think about it. Besides too much emphasis on ideas, too much ideas on what I can hold in my brain, I'd rather know what I can hold in my flesh, what I can feel in my bones, what inspires me physically, what inspires me emotionally. And that has more to do with practice. That has more to do with the side. It's called orthopraxy. It's what you do, the service you do, the rituals you do, the activities. Because you're inside something and you can feel it. You can sense dimensions that you can't entirely put into words. These old stories are familiar. If Joseph of Arimathea had not taken the Grail to Britain, Monty Python could never have sent it up. That whole thing there would be no Spamalot. How sad would that? But we also wouldn't have Camelot, the story, the legends, the inspiration, and the whole idea, a brief idea, that the Arthurian idea, whether it happened or not is not the point. The story is that we all got together and served our ideals instead of just personal greed. What a notion, what a notion. And of course, it probably never happened, or maybe it was tried a little bit, and maybe it didn't last too long, like in the story. But we need stories like that and symbols like this to hold our aspirations, to hold the beauty of the thing. Don't let it be forgot that once there was a spot for one brief shining moment that was known as Camelot. Namaste, blessed be, so be it. Our closing.